arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive and you don't have to be afraid.
Welcome to the Bassline. Jessica Hockett is the author and custodian of a unique Substack. Her research begins with the still largely unexplained mortality event that occurred in New York in the spring of 2020. She is a PhD. She is vastly insightful. She's asking questions that no one else is asking. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome to the Bassline the outstanding Dr. Jessica Hockett. How are you, Dr. Hockett?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, first of all, everyone, this is a pre-recorded show. This was supposed to be a live interview, but there are some technical problems at the Progressive Radio Network, which I hope will get sorted out promptly. But in the meantime, Jessica was kind enough to be flexible and to do this interview on Thursday rather than Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time when we normally air the Bassline. And I want to remind you guys to support this program. There are several ways of doing so. You can go to jeremiahhosea.com and buy the theme song of this show for $1. You can go to my Substack and become a paid subscriber. Just look up Jeremiah Hosea on Substack, JeremiahHosea. You can sign up for a chess lesson or sign up a loved one in your family for a chess lesson, no matter what their age or experience level. I am the founder of remotelearningchess.com. You can reach me through there or just directly through my email at jeremiahhosea@gmail. And what else? There was a new means of supporting the show. Oh, right. On April 27th, we're going to be having another 528 frequency jam in Harlem. So if you're in or around New York City, please come to this live music event. Listeners of the Bassline showed up last time and brought a great vibe. Folks came from Connecticut, from New Jersey. It was really incredible to see people converging in Harlem for a 528 frequency jam. And of course, I was turned on to the concept of 528 being such a powerful and healing frequency by former Bassline guest who I hope to have back on soon, my friend Dr. Leonard Horowitz, who's written extensively on this subject. So please support this program. It really means a lot to me. You are the wind beneath my wings. And I will continue to line up incredible interviews, such as the one we are about to do with this very fascinating guest. Dr. Jessica Hockett has been doing research unlike anything else that I've come across in the COVID space. And I'm very interested in her explanation of what she's doing exactly. So, Dr. Hockett, could you tell us the thrust of your Substack? Your Substack is unlike any other that I've seen. So could you explain it a little bit, please?
Sure, happy to do that. I guess first I should say that I came to Substack or resorted to Substack when my Twitter account was banned or suspended in July 2022 after repeatedly being flagged and having tweets flagged as being, misinformation and, against the narrative. I was suspended for 5.5 months. And then during that time, or maybe it was a little bit before then, that I had gone to Substack just because I needed a place to write about what I needed to write about. But the Substack has evolved a bit over, since then, since 2021, 2022. And I would say the thrust now is really trying to expose and research more about the entire pandemic narrative. But my main focus, or probably what I'm known for, is investigating the New York City mass casualty event of spring 2020, during which time you all reported the equivalent of 10 World Trade Center disasters worth of casualties in 11 weeks, most of that occurring in 6 weeks. And it's really something of a global outlier, alongside the event in Lombardy, Italy, which pretty much preceded the event in New York City by a couple weeks. But those two events are really what a colleague and I, Jonathan Engler, called it the twin peaks of the pandemic launch that helped substantiate the WHO's pandemic declaration and convince people everywhere, not just in New York, but everywhere, that there was a spreading deadly coronavirus on the prowl, and we all needed to take cover lest we become New York. So the death spike in New York has always fascinated me, and I started digging into it more in earnest, probably in 2021, but then again, when I was suspended on Twitter in 2022, I'm just trying to figure out like what in the world happened there. And I've come to the conclusion that the death spike did not happen as presented by the official data. And I think there's a combination of just straight up democide. People were straight up killed in hospitals, and not by a virus, but by what was done to them. But I think there's data fraud and data engineering from a couple different perspectives. But what's being shown is not what happened on the ground. That's the bottom line. But besides New York, I do look into the alleged disappearance of the flu. You might remember that, where positive flu tests seemed to disappear for a little while. Looking into the whole lab leak. Was there a lab leak, or was the virus from a wet market? Oh my goodness, how are we going to figure that out? So a lot of these, especially early parts of the narrative and the propaganda around it, that's what I delve into in a nutshell.
Right. Well, that's great. I'm so fascinated by those topics, and I'm also fascinated by the disinterest in those important topics. I remember, for example, people saying in sort of a cliche fashion, "Oh, it doesn't matter where the virus comes from. It's here now. We just need to do what we're being told." And it's like, no, we need to know what this is for both medical and legal reasons. And
Right.
why would you be insisting that we wouldn't want to know? It's so strange. It's like you don't want to know the background of what you're doing. You just want to be instructed with various protocols. I
Yeah.
don't understand that mindset at all. And then um, I've seen the spike that occurred that we were told occurred in New York that you highlight so well in your work, and it's just fascinating because you still have people wander the streets of New York with these ridiculous masks on, and basically, you know, at the time of this rollout, well, you're protecting yourself from a mortality event that has come and gone. Even if we took their numbers on paper and said, okay, these are correct, well, that event has passed. So no need to run around like a chicken with your head cut off any longer. Put
Sure.
away your mask. No need for an experimental intervention. Something crazy happened and it's over. But
Sure.
no one was ever presented the information in that manner. It was just like this sort of ongoing thing because of a virus just sort of lingers and exists, which makes me wonder now, well, what happened to coronavirus? He just kind of
Right.
toned down its act and just
Well,
decided, oh, okay, I'm just going to do a little show and now I disappear.
Well, you know what's funny about that coronavirus, you might remember, and this is a whole area of focus on my Substack that people can check out. I have a tab that says Elmhurst Hospital. Remember the Elmhurst Hospital,
Yeah, absolutely.
the alleged epicenter of the epicenter. Hilarious to me is that the New York City is actually divided into different health districts. I don't know if you know this or not, but the New York City Health Department has a map of different health districts. And
Okay.
Elmhurst is in the Corona Health District. I mean, it's next to the
Oh,
Corona neighborhood as well, but I sort of half joke, like, okay, Corona virus, like, is the CIA, like, are they playing a joke on us?
well, why didn't they just pick Corona Queens? And by the way, if you go to Corona Queens, you can get the best Italian ices there, but that's another story.
Oh, that's good to know. I spent a lot of time in Maspeth, but not at a school, but not in Corona. But anyway, we digress. What were we even saying? That well, so I was going to say actually with the people still walking around with masks. I mean, people have a form of PTSD from all this,
Absolutely.
or some people do. And to be fair, if that spike, which is New York City reports a 700% plus increase in just a matter of weeks, 27,000 extra people are reported to have died in the time frame, which is about normally in the time frame would be about 11,000 New Yorkers, and so we've got 27,000 more allegedly for a total of 38,000. I mean, if there were a virus that struck like a bomb on the city, if that really did happen, I don't blame some people for still being afraid, right? I mean, there would be some real legitimate fear that people would still have from that. But part of what I and some colleagues have unfortunately realized is we're not sure that the event happened as presented. And part of the reason is, like, even New Yorkers that we've talked to, or if you go back and look at pictures and videos, we just do not have the evidence to substantiate that the kind of body management that would have had to have occurred took
Hmm.
place. I interviewed, I haven't been able to write this up because I don't have permission, but I have talked about it some. I interviewed a longtime New York City detective who was on the DOA units. And he told me, I showed him the deaths at home, or the DOAs, and he's like, that that didn't happen. He's like, my guys would have been working so much overtime. He's like, that's not what was going on here in he was in Lower Manhattan. But he's like, yeah, it didn't happen. So there's a real mismatch, unlike 9/11. I like the 9/11 comparison, because unlike 9/11, we just don't have anything that we can point to and say, yes, that was responsible for killing all those people. With 9/11,
Right.
no matter what people believe about how the buildings came down, okay, we don't even have to address that. We all agree that the buildings came down, and about 2,800 people died in that, are reported to have died in that event, right? So it's like, well, yeah, of course 2,800 people died in the World Trade Center disaster. Two massive
Mhm.
skyscrapers came down, but New York is saying,
With people inside them.
with people inside them, although I think about 16,000, 17,000 people were reportedly evacuated. So, but still those numbers make sense. But then when you say,
Yeah.
okay, 10 times that number is reported to have been killed in those 2 months or so, like, does that make any sense? And people, including New Yorkers, don't quite know what to do with that we really might be looking at a mass illusion event. That would not mean that there wasn't excess death in the time period. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that there wasn't an increase, but through my research, I've tried to corroborate this event through many, many different forms of data and records, including the refrigerator trucks, right? The storied refrigerator trucks, the number of people who received federal funeral assistance is another example. And it just doesn't add up.
Okay, so let's look at New York a little bit. That's where I reside. That's where I was during the whole COVID event. And there are many things that we could look at in terms of what happened in New York. And I'd love to hear some of your information regarding, for example, what percentage of these deaths supposedly or actually occurred in nursing homes, for example. Also, maybe you could tell us about, I recall distinctly them saying that there was a certain number of COVID deaths, and now I'm failing to recall if they added or subtracted to that number. But there was a sudden, oh, wait a second, we were off by 20,000 or something like that.
Right.
Um, then there's the note. One thing that never gets discussed is the fact that previous administrations, including the Cuomo administration, had been there when hospitals were closed down. We had reduced our own hospital capacity, which no one seemed to mention. We had been reducing our hospital capacity leading up to this event, which wasn't very smart. And then it's amazing to me. It's sort of absurd actually to say, okay, we have trillions of dollars for, and we'll get back to the discussion of the injections, but we have trillions of dollars for mRNA injections, but we can't increase hospital capacity. We don't have enough beds.
Sure.
So you
Sure.
can do all this high tech investment, but you can't provide more beds. That to me is a farce. But can you unpack some of the details in terms of how do we get to these misleading numbers and what seems to be a misleading statistic in terms of the claims around COVID deaths during the spring in New York of 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with hospitals. So, the narrative was that hospitals were overwhelmed, or that they were going to be overwhelmed, and there weren't enough beds. In fact, New York City hospitals didn't really increase the number of beds. They said they did, but there's no evidence that they actually did that. There was an inflated sort of perception that hospitals did that, but with the beds that were added at the Javits Center, right? I think on Roosevelt Island, from the ship that was sent, the USS Comfort, right? So they didn't, those beds were severely underutilized, but their total was added to bed capacity in a manner that made it look like that hospitals had expanded capacity by 50%, which there's no real indication that they did that, or that they would even be able to do that. Hospitals did some rearranging. They created what I would call a closed system. The whole event was what I would call a closed system event, where different wards were set up and called COVID wards, and people tested, and then if they tested positive, no matter what they were there for, they were called a COVID patient and treated accordingly. But what New York City is claiming is that the equivalent of every bed in New York City hospitals, inpatients died. So just think about that for a second. And even if you've never worked in a hospital, and I've never worked in a hospital, but think about it in terms of maybe like a restaurant, right? Or just capacity of anything, or a music venue, right? And so if you picture all the hospitals in New York, excuse me, all the beds in New York City hospitals, which is about 60 hospitals, they're saying, okay, in this 2 months, it's like every patient in every bed died. That's incredible. It's incredible in terms of turnover and management alone. You mentioned the nursing home, what I would call the nursing home narrative, or about nursing home residents. That became part of the story pretty quickly, even in spring 2020. This idea that patients were being discharged alive from hospitals and being sent into nursing homes, and they were spreading the virus. I've written a lot about this on Substack. People can look into it. But part of that narrative, it helped feed the idea, which I think is a lie, that there was a sudden spreading novel coronavirus that had landed on New York City. But not only that, if you look at the places that people died, the most people by far died in hospitals. There were a lot of deaths in nursing homes, but as a percentage of the total increase, nursing home deaths were about 18% of the total increase, whereas hospital deaths were about 61% of the total increase. So a data point that we still don't have is how many nursing home residents died in the hospital? How many were sent in, maybe as part of staging? I would say at this point, we're staging the spread. We're sending nursing home residents in. They're being treated as though they have this new thing, right? And they died there. They never left. As you said, even during the event, there were all these sort of shell games and weirdness with numbers. In normal times, we cannot, like, you can't find out how many people died in Harlem yesterday. I can't find out how many people died in Chicago yesterday. Why? Because it's delayed, right? We did this real-time death reporting that was going on during the COVID era with these dashboards, and it's not a thing. They can't do it. So one thing that we now realize, or colleagues and I now realize that they were doing, is they were using models. They were using projections. And in New York, right in the beginning, really they were having direct data feeds, it seemed, from hospitals. That's where all that data was coming from initially. And Cuomo says that in a couple press conferences. And then they did this, I think it was around April 15th or so, they did this sudden addition of probables. That's what you're referring to. Like all of a sudden they're like, wait, we have all these deaths, all of these probable COVID deaths that were occurring in nursing homes and in people's homes. Like people are suddenly dying of COVID at home or something. And so then they added to the total. So this is all part of this like how many people actually died. And unlike Chicago, unlike in Illinois or some other states, in New York, you can't get death records. Like we can't get a list of names of, okay, who are all the
Mm.
people that died in that time? I'm not saying we need every single aspect of their death record, but you cannot submit an FOI, a Freedom of Information request, and get death certificates. So I'm being very literal when I say we don't even have proof that this event occurred as depicted in the form of basic death records. We have numbers. And as we all know by now, if we didn't before, government has every incentive to lie about death. Not just the causes of death, right? But the magnitude of death. So the motive for inflating the New York event would be to present New York news, use New York as center stage, right? Putting on a show. What better place? And say,
Right.
look at what
New
happened in New
York, New
York.
York.
Hey, Chicago, you don't want to be New York. Hey, LA, you don't want to be New York. You need to shut down. Do you see what I'm saying? But we don't have basic, we've got the names of the people from the World Trade Center disaster, right? Where are the names of the people from the event that caused 10 times as many deaths reportedly? That's information
Yeah.
that we need, I think, not just New Yorkers, but the whole world, because New York was put, like I said, on center stage, right? As they look
Yeah,
at the scary
absolutely.
virus bomb that just dropped on New York. It's absurd. I'm not minimizing people's deaths, the number of people who actually died as a result of genocidal policies. But
Hmm.
you have to almost laugh at some point at the absurdity. Think if your listeners just go on my Substack and they look at the graph and they would say, just like my kids are like, Mom, that doesn't even look real, and they're teenagers, but it looks like a bomb, it looks like an earthquake, it doesn't look like what you would expect of a spreading virus.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many questions pertaining to that. We need to know much more. I mean, I just found it very strange initially how you have a virus that reportedly begins in Wuhan. It flies over to northern Italy without quite making its way to southern Italy, follows the money to New York. And New York, of all places, once again, is the epicenter of this global event. Where, like you said, where would you get more publicity than New
Yeah.
York?
Well,
And
don't you remember it stopped off in Iran? It stopped off in
oh,
Iran and reportedly killed 12 regime officials in Iran, right? And then, yeah, you're right, Italy, because I don't think, and I love your perspective on this actually, but I'm not sure that when people were Americans anyway, were hearing about this new virus from China, we kind of think China lies anyway, or that the Chinese government lies, right? That's not, I'm not disrespecting the Chinese people, but I'm not sure that
sure.
people actually were scared by that. But when you see images about Italy, I mean, Americans love Italy, right? I mean, we love Italians, we love the food, we love the culture. And so if it's happening in Italy, it must really be happening. But let's think about the globe for a second. So we have this virus from afar narrative, this something wicked this way comes, to quote Shakespeare, like coming this way. But LA is actually closer, or it's on the other side, right? Like, why didn't the virus come this way and drop like a bomb on LA? LA gets some
Yeah.
a virus bomb later in the year, but the LA versus
Mhm.
New York graph is incredible. It's laughable. And then Chicago's sort of in the middle. We actually reported a positive case or positive test about 6 weeks before New York did, but our mortality
Hmm.
event here didn't begin until after New York's did. So if this is a spreading virus, why does it wait?
Mhm.
Why does it wait for
Yeah.
lockdown orders? Right?
Well,
What
I would love, yeah.
go
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm sorry to expand now from New York to global, but you're reminding me of the total fascination with which I would watch obsessively, honestly, this daily ticker that was offered by, I don't know if you ever heard of this. I don't know if they're a firm or apparently they're funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, called Roy Lab Stats. They had something, I had an entire television channel called the Coronavirus Information Channel, and I noticed, oh, it's presented by Roy Lab Stats. And apparently an AI system told me it was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, but the foundation, that is. But this was identical pretty much to you. Maybe if you didn't see that version, you saw the John Hopkins ticker, which had a global breakdown of every country in the world, every flag of every country showing coronavirus cases, deaths, and recoveries. At which point you'd look at this and immediately say, what's going on here? Is this the most coordinated effort in the history of the world?
Yeah.
And one thing that stood out to me is looking at the vast number of countries, and I would love to see someone really sort through this and put a compilation together of the number of countries that had single digit, double digit, or triple digit mortality throughout the whole pandemic. At which point, many people would say, oh, well, these places are more remote. There's not as many people visiting Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, as there are coming to New York or whatever. But then you'll see that those places did have thousands and thousands of cases. So there was every opportunity in the world for the virus to annihilate everybody. But for some reason, some of these countries were just so much either more well prepared or well equipped, or just the people were just less vulnerable. And you have 2 years of a pandemic in which, again, single digit, double digit, or triple digit deaths out of millions of people, which just makes you ask the question, well, what's the difference between them and us? Like, can I just move to Tanzania and become immune to coronavirus? Other than, unless you're the president who died of COVID supposedly after exposing PCR fraud, and he was also an MD
Right.
himself. But what are your thoughts about looking at the global picture and what I always call the question of the virus, how it spread and how it did not spread?
Yeah, it's completely absurd. And really, the countries that quote did not have a pandemic, especially if we're looking pre-shot, right? I like to look pre-COVID shot, and actually spring 2020 in particular, because after that, the compounding effects of different measures on people's health, and then you got the shots, and that sort of gets into the mix, right? But in essence, if your country or even your county, right here in the United States, did not launch a mass testing effort, beginning with people who were in the hospital, you didn't really have a pandemic. I mean, so the appearance thereof. It was the testing and the overgenerous tests that were picking up all kinds of things. I'll just summarize it that way, and being run at very they're high sensitivity, sensitive to just little bits and pieces of things. Again, just keeping it simple here. But if your country did not do that, you didn't have a pandemic. My sister actually was a doctor at the time in Togo, Africa, Togo, West Africa. She'd been there for about 10 years or so, and they were not experiencing a pandemic in spring 2020 at all, but they also weren't testing there at all.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating. But as you noted earlier, even within the same country, I mean, the graph of Bergamo, Italy versus Rome or even Bergamo versus Venice is striking. So we have this virus that does not cross geographical borders. Even within the United States in spring 2020, we have what one of my colleagues, Martin Neal, calls a pinpoint pandemic, where you've got New York
Mhm.
Metro, Chicago, Detroit, New Orleans, but not Orlando, right? A lot of people from all over the world in Orlando, in Disney World all the time, but for some reason that was fine. Not so much in Minneapolis. Do you see what I'm saying? So even people who believe
Absolutely.
there was something spreading, they have to recognize that this spreading virus was remarkably selective and strategic in ways that don't make sense, even within countries in areas of close geographical proximity.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, even within households. I heard of many instances of husband or wife get test positive, is not feeling well, sick as a dog for a week or 2 weeks, having not infected anyone else in the household.
Sure.
In some cases, including elders and the vulnerable. Like, okay, mom is sick, but grandpa's not sick, two kids aren't sick, the husband's not sick, no one else is sick, which makes you say, well, how does a virus spread all the way around the world and then fail to spread itself in an enclosed environment?
Precisely. And, if maybe you're like this too, but as a result of all this, I don't have a medical background. I have advanced degrees, but they're not in medicine or science. But as a result of all this, I have a lot of questions about a lot of things that we've been told about illnesses. My joke is, that the four of us in our household, I can't remember a time we've ever been sick all at once. I can't even recall a time when my husband and I have been sick at the same time. And if you can't get sick from the person you sleep with, how can you get sick from a guy behind the deli counter? I don't,
Right.
all due respect to the delis in New York and bodegas, but I don't, I can't get sick from you if I can't get sick from the guy I sleep with. That's the bottom line for,
Yeah, and I think all these things should be discussed publicly, should be unpacked for the sake of public education. And, instead of calling people ridiculous for asking very sensible questions, well, let's just put all the information out on the table and explain to people what did happen if
sure.
someone supposedly has an explanation about any of these things. I don't want to, or I don't expect you to get into too much detail in terms of your technical process, because I know you're a highly trained individual, and I know we can't just get a fly-by-night PhD from listening to you here. But I know that you're academically trained. I'd love to hear what was the bring data and looks. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we just had a little audio
All right.
glitch. But so the question is, just if you could explain somewhat your technical process in terms of how you went about your research a little bit, obviously a summarized version, because I'm sure it's pretty in depth.
Well, what's funny is the math that even though I do have a statistics training, as anyone who has a PhD does, the math I'm using is very fifth grade. I'm basically taking daily. That's maybe one thing that's a little different about me than some other people is I focus on daily data, what was happening each day, and of different kinds. So I take a look at how I'll use New York as the example, but how many people died in New York each day? Okay, let's graph that to see the event. Let's do it by age. Let's do it by cause. Let's do it by the place of death. Now let's look at what was happening with ambulances, right? How many ambulances were dispatched? How many in, Staten Island, Manhattan, Brooklyn? And so all of these different burial permits. Actually, I haven't put this out there yet, but burial permits. Let's look at that. And so I've really tried to focus on the event. Let's look at what happened in this time period and look at what story these data sets, not only individually, but in concert. You can appreciate this as a musician. In
Yeah.
concert, and there's dissonance to build on the music metaphor. There's a lot of dissonance and things that don't make sense. The ambulance data is a great example where right when the federal government says we're going to take 15 days to slow the spread, y'all, all of a sudden the ambulance dispatches in New York go up. Cardiac arrests out of the hospital go way up. And right when the federal government says that's amazing to me. What happened? What happened, New York? We didn't get that in Chicago. All of a sudden, Trump says 15 days to slow the spread, and it triggers cardiac arrests all over the city for weeks.
Mm.
That's really strange. And I've got a New York City detective who says he doesn't think that happened. That's really strange. So it's not only the data too, the the numbers, the stats. It's taking the numbers and trying to corroborate with eyewitness accounts or interviewing doctors, looking back at the propaganda from the time, these elevated doctor voices. Do you remember this? Like these doctors with their videos and I'm under siege at Elmhurst Hospital. And you look back at that, and what I've realized is these voices, they're really following something of a script, like you would
Mhm,
expect in a war. So
mhm.
yeah, this is pretty unsettling and not something I always thought or realized, but it's almost like the city was taken through a simulation or a
Yeah.
drill, like a World War III, what we need practice, we're going to pretend, not that this is a pandemic. There wasn't a pandemic plan activated. Nobody thinks that anymore, I hope. What was activated was more like there's a chemical attack. And there are people who say that New York had some kind of poisoning event. I think those theories are really interesting, or the 5G theories. I haven't really seen anybody who's able to grapple with the official data. Now, I think the official data is
Mhm.
manipulated, but who's able to go through and say what happened? Or even, do you know a lot of New Yorkers who became suddenly sick? A lot of New
No,
Yorkers will, yeah, I mean, you're like a lot of New Yorkers I talk to. I'm like, so did you become
I
suddenly?
mean, take for example the building in which I live. It's a relatively small apartment building by New York City apartment building standards. It's a sixth floor building,
Okay.
um, uh, four apartments on each floor. I don't know how many people live in the building in total, but after being there for months, well, no one was severely ill by COVID except for the neighbor upstairs who's a police officer, big guy, who apparently got pretty ill for like a week or two, and then he was okay. The very vulnerable, apparently vulnerable older lady who lives on the second floor, who, has a walker and takes a really long time to get from the second floor to the first floor, or the other like elderly people in the building, no one was hospitalized, no one was killed. So I just look at the people, my neighbors, first of all, and say, well, everyone's okay. We're months and months into this. And then at the time of the emergency vaccines, it's like, well, I don't consider it an emergency to that respect that I would ask for an emergency medical intervention. And also, I bring this up in general. It's kind of a harsh example, but I'll take the strongest personal example I can from my own life, which is I reflect back on the death of my father over 10 years ago. My dad unfortunately drowned to death trying to save his wife from drowning, and they both drowned, and their dog drowned. It was, obviously very sad event, and personally very sad for me. But the point is, as sad as I am of the loss of my father, I'm not going to run around and say that we need to implement all sorts of things and say, oh, for example, no one should ever go to the beach again. You shouldn't be allowed to swim in a swimming pool. You could drown. My father drowned. Don't you understand? My father drowned. So it's like, if someone died, I'm very sad for that, honestly. But don't then turn around and say that that's the basis for things that must be implemented into my life.
Sure. Well, and wasn't that the rationale from the very beginning? And it's sad to say that even, churches and religious leaders used this idea too, that if you really, it's an appeal to virtue, but if you really love your neighbor, right? Or if you really care about other people, you have to stay home, right? And you have to wear a mask, or you have to get the shot, right? You can see how that progression developed, and that people were, convinced, either truly convinced that this was the right thing to do. They were afraid. They were afraid of what other people would think of them. I mean, I can't think of, you mentioned the shot. I did not get the shot, by the way, just disclosure. I never even entertained it, but I have no judgment against people who did. And I can't think of a reason why somebody got the COVID shot that isn't linked in some way, shape, or form to fear. I'm afraid I won't be able to travel. I'm afraid my kid won't be able to go back to school. I'm afraid that I'm going to kill my grandma. I'm afraid of not appearing virtuous with among the ladies who lunch that I lunch with. Do you see what
Yeah,
I'm saying? It was all fear.
absolutely. Yeah. Different forms of fear.
Absolutely. And the propaganda and the messaging was was planted and aimed at that from the beginning. And it's one of the many reasons why, especially looking back, it's almost impossible to seriously look back at the events. Hindsight is literally 2020, and not see the design in it. and not see the planning. I explained this to my daughter the other day. She's like, so why do you think it was planned? I'm like, designs have designers. That's
Okay, so you're leading me perfectly into my next question. I that position in the position of saying, wait a second, there's, if I may say so, a criminal component to what's happening here. This isn't simply a natural event with public health authorities responding to the event. So what are some of the clues that alerted you to an intentionality behind all of this?
That's a great question. I think from the very beginning, I thought, I don't know that I thought in criminal terms, but I was never afraid of the virus, that I can say. But I knew that things were not adding up, and this, whatever this was, it's not what they told us. Because look, this person who ostensibly died from COVID, they had all these problems. So I'm not really sure we can say that this person died of the new thing. And there were a lot of people who were saying that. Did they die from COVID, with COVID? Does this really make sense? So from the beginning, things weren't adding up. I would also point out that from the beginning, especially in New York, there was sort of the idea that there was cover up planted, or going to be cover up planted with the whole nursing home thing, right? Or the New York was unprepared. We didn't know what to do. Oh, look, Cuomo tried to cover up the number of people who died, right? So there was always the element of there's something criminal or not right going on. I didn't used to think that the whole thing was planned. I didn't. People can see tweets of me saying that, like, I'm not really on that train yet. But the more that I looked at the events in New York, when I became connected with people in a more international group called Pandata, and you start hearing the experiences of different people from around the world, and they're like, well, our government was saying this, well, our government was saying this. You start to see the coordination. Maybe at the time in 2020, we were all cordoned off, even on social media. Like, there are people who, like, I should have seen that person's tweets who was tweeting in the UK, but I didn't. And I wonder about how we were segmented during that time. Really good analysts whose stuff I never saw. But once you start connecting with people, and they tell you what was going on in their country, and you're like, our government was saying the same thing. That's really interesting. You realize this has to be coordinated in some way, shape, or form. But it's also looking more specifically at what hospitals were directed to do, especially in Italy, in New York City, that you come to see, or I came to realize they had to, or part of my hypothesis is they had to start by, in some of these places, they had to start by killing people who were already in healthcare settings. That's the only way that you can get the appearance of this event. And look at the themes here and what people were saying, these elevated voices, that this has to be part of a design. This wasn't just an F up, excuse my fake swearing there. Like, this could not have been, or Piers Robinson, I think you're familiar with him. I think they say over there, like, is it a cock up or a conspiracy? Like, did they just F up, or did they conspire? And there is conspiracy on collusion is maybe a better word, for more palatable word for some people, but it had to have been planned. And even if it's just the case that certain plans were activated because they messed up, at this point, it's impossible to say that they did not cover up the covering up of the covering up, right? So there is still conspiracy, and anybody at this point who's saying no conspiracy was involved in any of it, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, they might just not be watching TV, which is probably a good idea anyway. But most people can say that the government's lied about the COVID shot. They lied about the efficacy. They lied about the adverse events that people were experiencing. And so part of what I try to say to even other analysts, I'm like, they lied about this, but you think they're telling the truth about a novel spreading coronavirus from Wuhan. Why do you think that?
Right, and also, right, and likewise, I mean, I think there was a great deal of deception, aka lying, that was going on. But even, let's play naive here for a moment. Even if there was no deception, they were just wrong repeatedly about fundamental things, which, as a chess teacher, I point out, when you study the game of chess, you don't just study great moves. You also need to study the nature of a mistake. At high level chess, the mistakes are moves that appear to be good moves that don't work out technically, but they don't just make sloppy mistakes. They make moves that look like good moves, but then, so once you said this will stop transmission and infection, and it doesn't, why would I assume that that was the only mistake you made? I'm assuming at that point we have a broken technical process, that you're not clear about what you are doing, what you are implementing, and the effects of that thing. So to decide, oh, well, we made these huge mistakes, but here's the cutoff point. It's not going to result in the shortening of my life or in long-term consequences or whatever. It's like, sorry, that's not how mistakes work. A mistake is specifically something that you did not anticipate the consequences of that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and you can probably appreciate this, but when looking back, and I've written an article that includes these ideas, but you can see where even in the implementation of things in spring 2020 or early 2020, you can see built in what I call potential future excuses. You're like, oh, I see what was happening here. They were saying there wasn't enough masks, there wasn't enough PPE, there wasn't enough testing, right? And so you can see
we
how
didn't start the lockdown soon enough.
we didn't start, and it's all, if you tell yourself, once you say, okay, what if there was no novel spreading coronavirus? I'm not talking about what if viruses don't exist. That's a good question, but that's separate. What if there were
Right.
no novel spreading coronavirus, and you go back and you look at the narrative and you see it all, every single piece through that filter, you start to realize that everything is around that core, what I call the core lie, that the core lie wasn't there is a virus, it's that something is spreading, right?
Mm.
We need to slow it and we need to stop it. So I find that really, really helpful. Even lab leak versus wet market. People say, oh, lab leak, that was suppressed. It was censored. No, it wasn't. It was out there. It wasn't given equal time. You go back and you look at even independent news sites like Zero Hedge, and I mean there's all kinds. The lab leak narrative was planted from the very beginning, right? It was lab leak versus wet market or zoonotic leak. But what you weren't supposed to question, or what you weren't supposed to think is something spreading at all? And
Is that necessarily true?
and how do we know? And this thing is causing this new disease. How do we know that?
And of course, another feature of that, right, is like if you get the chicken pox, well, we kind of notice because you like have chicken pox all over your face. But with COVID, I was making a joke that, now you get a COVID sprained ankle, you know, any injury could be subsumed under the label of COVID. I mean, and that was actually something that I said jokingly until recently. I came across a person who literally said that, well, I tested positive for COVID and then I started feeling soreness in my wrists. So I'm saying, okay, so you got a severe acute respiratory syndrome and it made your wrists hurt.
Yeah.
It's just like, who's ever heard of something that just could be assigned to any ailment that you experience? We say, oh, it's coronavirus just manifested itself in that way in your particular case.
Right. The list of symptoms is a veritable laundry list, including not having any symptoms. Did you know that you not having symptoms is a symptom of COVID? I mean, do you remember all of that through the
Yeah,
asymptomatic infection and all of that, where you're not sick? No, you actually may be sick. And you wonder too, my colleague Jonathan Engler writes a lot about this. You wonder about nocebo effect, or just the impact of people thinking that they're going to be sick or their
yeah,
friend is sick. And this happens to my daughter.
yeah,
Like her friends are
yeah.
sick, and then all of a sudden she feels like she's experiencing symptoms. I'm not minimizing that, but there are other explanations, psychogenic illness, just behavioral cues there are
Yeah, I've
other,
often wondered as a general question, like if you announce to the nation, there is a sickness, how many people at that instant reach for their throats? I'm sick.
I'm sick, right? Or you notice things that you wouldn't have noticed. There's an Apple Watch. I wrote a bit about this on Substack too. There's an Apple Watch app that will notify you when your pulse is changing, I think it is, when you have differences in body temperature. Like it's telling you that you're getting sick. And you may or may not be, but my body probably goes through temperature, trivial temperature fluctuations all the time for certain reasons, or even a heart rate. But now you have this, it's Pavlovian, really, where you have something that's conditioning you to thinking that you're sick, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
I guess my point is you don't need a virus in order to have symptoms of something. But we had this virus, and then not just the announcement about the virus, but a test to go along with it, right? So that everything and anything that people had, if they tested positive, it had to be that thing, right? The cause of
Right.
it had to be that thing. It's ridiculous. It was ridiculous then, but it's even more ridiculous looking back at it now.
So I know it's not really the focus of your writing, but what are your thoughts just offhand about the injections? They were so pressed about injecting everyone and everything. I mean, they were so anxious to lower the age of your eligibility. They lowered it to 12, and then they were thrilled when they could inject 6-month-olds. They even, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you've seen the absurd stories. They injected zoo animals, some of which have died suddenly since. Why would you give a giraffe a
Yeah.
human coronavirus injection? It was like, was that a publicity stunt? I mean, what were they thinking? But what are your thoughts about this need to inject everything that moves with so-called COVID vaccines? Why did they want to do that offhand in your
That's
mind?
that's a great question. That sort of speaks to motive, right? Like what do we think was the motive of all of this? And many people say, well, the motive or the reason for the pandemic, whatever you think about the planning, and if there was a novel spreading virus, a lot of people will say, well, the real goal, the real end game was to launch the mRNA platform, right? And get shots in every arm. And I think that that's true. I'm a little different from some other analysts in that I think at least the US, that the US was trying to cover some things up that had been going on with mortality. With fentanyl, I mean, fentanyl deaths had been rising for a while, but I think they may have even been higher than they were shown. And the government was trying to hide that up. I think there have been problems with vaccines for decades, but including the seasonal flu shot, which, some people say, well, I've never gotten the flu shot. A lot of Americans do, and a lot of Americans are actually mandated or coerced to get it as part of their job or being in the military or by virtue of being in a nursing home. And I've seen some really good indications that suggest that things with the flu shot were not going well. And countries all over the world are already coordinated through the WHO with flu and other disease surveillance. So that's something that
Mm.
for me is, I believe, in the mix. But people who say it was part of injecting pharma with cash, right? It was flailing, or there are reasons related to the economy. Some people say it was and is part of digital ID and digital currency, right? The idea that we're going to restrict people's movements and like develop a social credit system based on whether or not people have had or certain shots. Trying to substantiate and realize, get ROI, so to speak, on the pandemic preparedness industry and bioterrorism industry, especially the past 2 decades plus, but even longer than that. Significant investments were made in portending about a pandemic, right? This pandemic event that we could experience. So if you think about, well, if you're preparing for the forest fire, of a lifetime that, would only ever happen if there's five simultaneous lightning strikes in a sequoia, grove or whatever, like something that's never going to
Right.
happen. Sooner or later, you might light the matches yourself, right? Now,
Right.
some people might say, yes, they released a bioweapon on the world. No, I don't think they did. I don't think they have the capability to do it. They cannot make it, so they have to fake it, right? And if you can make it and fake it in New York City, you can make it and fake it.
Anywhere, right? New
Don't make
York, New York.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think all of that is in the mix, but they of course had to get as many shots in arms as possible because they had created this specter of a scary novel virus, right? And we shut down the world for it. So you have to substantiate what you did, even if somebody wants to say this was an F up, they messed up, they were stupid. Let's go with that for a second. Okay, fine. But then that alone is why they would say everybody needs a shot, right? Because it substantiates the scary virus. And actually that gets worse if in some ways, if it's like, oh, it was, it came from a lab. Now you are psychologically more likely to excuse Donald Trump saying 15 days to slow the spread. And I'm not anti-Trump necessarily, right? I'm just using that as an example where it's like, yeah, of course they shut everything down. Of course they sent the USS Comfort to New York. Of course they did the field hospitals everywhere around the world because they knew it was a bioweapon and they were afraid. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So now we've had
Well, this is
this proof of concept exercise that it's done. What's done is done. They proved that they could do it. They proved that they could do it. So in a lot of ways, Operation COVID was a huge success. A huge success from my point
I
of view.
wonder that to the extent, I wonder what extent to which everything worked like a charm, and to what extent it was a plan full of folly and miscalculation. I'm not clear. I don't know if they're pleased with their results or if they're dissatisfied with what they inflicted.
I think they're patting themselves on the back. How do we know? Andrew Cuomo is running for mayor.
Yeah, right.
And so I would say he's part of the protection racket. Fauci, Trump, Cuomo, they
But you
are
know
all,
what I found, I'll say quickly since you mentioned Cuomo, he made some interesting comments expressing sympathy with the vaccine hesitant position, if you will. He said, well, people aren't going to trust these shots, and rightfully so. And then I noticed after those remarks, they pulled the plug on him. And I made it akin to removing your star quarterback right before the Super Bowl, where it's like, wait a second, I'm getting benched here. It's like, yeah, buddy, you're on the bench.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think he didn't anticipate that. Some people just before that were anticipating they were going to bypass the process and insert him as the Democratic Party leading presidential candidate. He would have been America's governor, like Giuliani was America's mayor, and he fumbled the football and they pulled the plug.
yeah. But now, I mean, so the COVID shot, I mean, it was, even if they were saline, it was wrong. It's immoral. Like it's all immoral, no matter what. And if
I
it,
agree.
and yes, people were harmed, people were killed, but by the shot. Absolutely. Even though that's not my specialty, of colleagues, that is their specialty. They are 100% right about that in my opinion. But
I agree.
what's even worse, what makes that even worse is if there's no novel spreading scary virus in the first place, right? And
Right.
so what you sometimes see is
Fabricated.
it's palatable, or it's acceptable for people to question the shot, but you're like, can we talk about early 2020? Can we talk about New York? Can we talk about Italy? People don't want to do that, right? So in a lot of ways, the COVID shot and discussing it has become it's still part of a permitted, it's permitted, right? And my opinion about one of the reasons why it's permitted is because that's fine. They'd rather have your focus on that than on anything having to do with 2020. That's that's how I see it.
Yeah, that's incredible analysis, and I think we should definitely take that into consideration. I think you make a great point. We're unfortunately out of time. Could you just tell us in the next 30 seconds to 60 seconds how people can follow your work, your outstanding work, Dr. Hockett?
Yeah, absolutely. My Substack is actually at www.woodhouse76.com. I do live in a wood house, but it's a shout out to a previous Twitter handle I had, or moniker, Emma Woodhouse. That's a Jane Austen character. So Woodhouse 76. I was born in 1976. Or I actually have two Twitter accounts. The bigger one is at wood_house76. And then the smaller one is at JA Hockett76. But you can access those through the Substack as well. But yeah,
And what about on X? Did you ever reinstate your X account?
Yeah, those are the handles I just gave on X. The first two, the at Woodhouse_76. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'll be following you momentarily then.
Yeah, and then at JA Hockett 76. That's the other.
That's phenomenal. Thank you so much, Dr. Hockett. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, and I really appreciate your Substack and all the incredible work that you're doing. If you weren't doing it, I don't think anyone else is quite covering the bases that you're covering. So I think it's phenomenal what you're doing. I hope we get to talk to you sometime.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and please tune in next week. We have tremendous guests lined up for weeks to come, and thank you for your ongoing support. JeremiahHosea.com, Jeremiah Hosea on Substack, RemoteLearningChess.com, and remember April 27th at Rock Mill Fitness on 124th, just north of 124th on Malcolm X. We're doing another 5 to 8 frequency jam. So thank you all for tuning in. Have a beautiful weekend. Take care.
When you walk with open arms towards the sun, you feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, 'cause you know the truth, and the truth is love. Yes, it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learn from a book or from the news. It's not like that, 'cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib on baby did long. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib on baby did love's the highest truth. Nothing could be higher than love, my friend. Love's the deepest truth. Nothing could be deeper than love, my friend. When you stop and you take the time just to think about your life, you'll recall the ones you love and the ones who were always there for you. Better thank those friends better. You better make amends. Go and tell them now, yeah. Tell them what they mean to you. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib on baby did love. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Doop 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 a doo. Dib on baby did love.